In the opening scenes of the movie, we see an infamous poem said among the sailors displayed on the screen. It is about a witch of the Puritan era. During this time, the notorious witch met her demise in the depths of an ocean on a moonless night. Legend has it that her children were spirited away. Thus, it is believed that she would return one frosty day to claim other people's children. The screen turns black, and in the background, we hear hurried screams of someone calling out to another person named David. Fast forward to the present day. We meet a young woman named Sarah. She is discovered adrift amidst the wreckage of a sailing sea. The woman is saved and returned back to safety by the Coast Guard. The woman is breathing hard and looks like she has gone through hell. There is a nasty wound on her forehead. Alongside her are her 2 young daughters. Soon enough, the terrified woman finds herself in the custody of the police. She sits, whimpering in an interrogation room, with a glass of coffee. Soon, a detective named Lydia Clarkson arrives at the station. The lieutenant is greeted by a policeman who briefs her about the strange situation. It turns out that they are yet to find the happenings of the incident that befell Sarah. Lydia enters the interrogation room and greets the awaiting woman. Sarah sees the woman and immediately inquires about the well-being of her children. It is, without a doubt, her primary concern. The detective understands her worries and assures her that they're safe. However, the woman immediately wants to make some contact with her children, but Lydia asks her to be patient. She wants her to tell the details of the incident that happened before allowing Sarah to meet her girls. This request causes Sarah to go quiet. After some beckoning by the detective, Sarah musters up her courage and then delves into the harrowing events of that fateful day. The pitiful woman strangely reveals that her husband David tried to fight a certain thing but to no avail, so she had no choice but to put it in the bottom of the sea. She says that evil seeks a vessel to inhabit, and in their case, that vessel was none other than the ill-fated boat itself. She hesitates, doubting anyone would believe her account, but Detective Clarkson insists on hearing the story. The scene then shifts to 4 months back in time when the Coast Guard named Merlin stumbles upon an abandoned sailboat named Mary. The guard calls back and informs about the presence of the old boat. He mentions that the vessel is empty and it seems to have been abandoned at sea for a very long time, which resulted in its bad condition. After the call, Merlin and his crew enter the boat on a cautious exploration. They use flashlights to see the darker insides of the vessel, only to be confronted by eerie sounds emanating from a cabin. When one of the crew members opens the door, the act unwittingly unleashes something ominous that attacks them. Meanwhile, on the other side we see Sarah's husband, David, who is an operator of tourist ferries. He has gone to a boatyard with his buddy Mike, where a particular vessel is set to go up for auction. It's none other than Mary. This boat inexplicably captures David's heart. He approaches it and admires it all over. The man has an eye for boats and knows a good one when he sees one. The boat catches his heart so much that he ends up making an impulsive purchase of it. Back at home, we see Sarah and her 2 daughters. The elder one, named Lindsay, is looking through pictures to decide on her tattoo, while the smaller one, named Mary, is impatiently waiting for her fallen tooth to grow out quickly. The mother soon gets a call from David, who subsequently invites Sarah and their 2 daughters to see this newfound acquisition. Once they arrive at the place, Mary is happy since she gets a boat of her own name, but Sarah is not thrilled in the least with David's spontaneous decision and questions the practicality of it all. She is worried that her husband is being blinded by his love for ships, which is costing them more than necessary burden. He is planning to sell their cars to make up for the remaining payment. David has dreams of transforming it into a family cruiser in hopes of escaping the grind of his work and starting a business of his own. He reassures Sarah, saying that they can take people on the boat as passengers. Who knows, this opportunity might change their lives forever. Sarah, on the other hand, remains skeptical, pointing out the considerable cost involved in refurbishing the boat. They argue back and forth when Lindsay arrives, and Sarah goes away with her daughter to cool her mind. Later on, we see David sighing on the deck. He realizes that he should have consulted Sarah before making the impromptu boat purchase. The man apologizes, acknowledging that he can't quite explain why he felt compelled to buy it without discussing it with her first. Sarah, after some consideration, eventually agrees, bringing relief and joy to David's face. The following day, the family sets to work on restoring the ship. They get the assistance of David's friend, Mike, and Lindsay's boyfriend, Tommy. After working hard on restoration and getting over with paperwork, the ship is finally ready. They perform a traditional ship inauguration, shattering a wine bottle against its bow and then revel in the festivity. That night, David announces their plan to embark for Bermuda in the coming morning. The man is brimming with excitement. However, David's former boss, Jay, attempts to intervene, expressing concern about the safety of the voyage. He suggests that the ship itself appears haunted, given the mysterious disappearance of its previous owners in the middle of the sea. David, though, remains resolute in his decision, brushing off Jay's warnings. After expressing his concerns, Jay eventually praises David. He says that David is the best captain that he had. Afterwards, all the people gathered urges Captain David to give a speech. The night is brimming with excitement and eagerness for what is to come ahead. After the speech, the family gathers near the boat to take pictures. While taking the family photo, Tommy strangely catches a glimpse of a bright flash of light emanating from the vessel. It gives him a momentary shock and he drops the phone, but when David comes to ask, he dismisses it as nothing. Later that night, Sarah comes to put Mary to bed. She sings a lullaby for her and the little girl slowly drifts off to sleep. As she sings, she hears peculiar sounds coming from outside. She turns to look outside momentarily but sees nothing. When Sarah turns back around to check on Mary, she is startled to see a terrifying ghost resembling Mary's silhouette in the room. Terrified, the woman screams and gasps awake. Turns out, it was just a vivid dream and nothing else. She finds David already awake and getting ready. He asks how she is feeling and they talk cheerfully for a moment. David mentions how the wood on the siren bow is almost 300 years old according to Jay. The couple encourage each other, their happiness quite evident. With their anxieties quelled, the family soon sets sail for Bermuda, thoroughly enjoying their journey. That afternoon, Tommy carefully goes near the bow and warily looks down at the figurehead. Meanwhile, Lindsay approaches Sarah and asks her about what she would like to eat. After getting her preference, she asks if what Jay had said was true. Sarah reassures her that Jay was intoxicated that day and there's no cause for concern. Plus, since he lost his best captain, he must be sore about it too. The girl eventually accepts the explanation and goes away. After Lindsay leaves, Sarah gets lost in thought. Although she assured her daughter, it seems that she herself is also a bit concerned about the strange stories. Soon, Sarah goes to check on Mary and finds the door locked. After pushing it a little, she manages to get in. Inside, she discovers Mary's room covered in her drawings. The mother smiles initially, but then something unsettling catches her eye. A strange drawing that depicts a mysterious woman. Later that night, David experiences a disquieting dream featuring a mysterious woman, jolting him awake in a cold sweat. Alarmed, he notices the ship is adrift and hurries upstairs, with Sarah in tow, to investigate. There, he finds a disturbing noose hanging. He calls out for Tommy and finds the boy standing quietly on one end on the ship. His eyes are fixed on the horizon and he stands still. Baffled, David queries Tommy about why he raised the anchor. Tommy's sudden, unsettling response sends shivers down their spines. He claims that some woman wants them to continue sailing. As Tommy slowly turns to face David, a shocking sight meets their eyes. He has used a knife to cut at the tattoo on his chest, which is now grossly covered in blood. All of a sudden, the boy lunges at David with the knife in a menacing intent. The couple manages to fend off Tommy's, but the encounter leaves them deeply shaken. Back to the present, we see Sarah continue her story. She tells the detective that they decide to have Tommy confined to a mental institution on the Abaco Islands, agreeing to keep this traumatic incident a closely guarded secret from the rest of the family. Sarah does not sit well with this decision, but David assures her that he cares for the boy. Since he attacked the man with a knife, how could he trust him with his daughters anymore? However, this decision strains the already delicate relationship between Sarah and Lindsay, causing tensions to fire up. They get into an argument and the mother-daughter duo struggles to connect. In the heat of the moment, Lindsay calls her mother untrustworthy since she cheated on her father. Sarah immediately goes silent and her daughter leaves the room. Moments later, Mike comes in. He sees a worried Sarah and asks if she is okay. The woman sighs and says how she messed up. Mike reassures her that everything would be alright and she belongs in this boat with David. He caresses her hand as he speaks. Right that moment, David arrives and the man quickly lets her hand go. Mike leaves and David also goes away with a suspicious glance towards his wife. Seems like he isn't very pleased with her wife's closeness with his friend. Returning to the present, Detective Clarkson continues her interrogation, probing into Sarah's relationship with Mike. Sarah denies any closeness beyond the fact that Mike was like a younger brother to David. Clarkson, however, remains skeptical. She then asks about Mary and why she was the first amongst them to be affected by the strange happenings. Sarah hypothesizes that maybe it was because she was the youngest. Children are more prone to believe in strange phenomena. As she says this, the woman starts panicking and blabbering about how she had to destroy her. It is unclear who she is talking about. Clarkson watches the woman panic and insists they will continue after a break, hinting that if Sarah wants to reunite with her daughters, she must provide a more coherent account instead of talking about some spirit or some entity that came aboard and haunted them. Lindsay leaves the room, leaving Sarah to stare at the camera, her thoughts racing. Back to the past. On the ship, Sarah catches sight of a child passing by, whom she believes to be Mary. Following the young figure, she enters a cabin and encounters wet footprints leading to a small closet. As Sarah investigates, someone shoves her inside the closet and slams the door shut. In the pitch blackness, Sarah uses her flashlight, but it also goes out. She then lights a match and is startled to see a strange woman's face. Her heart races, and she shouts out asking who it is. Fortunately, David opens the closet door, dispelling the tension. The woman quickly goes to check on her children, only relaxing after she has done so. David reassures her, claiming that their children have been peacefully asleep for the past hour, and that what she witnessed must have been a vivid dream. The woman tells her husband about the wet footprints, and how someone closed the closet door on her, but David brushes off her worries. He blames it on the ship being old, or maybe it was Lindsay pranking her. The woman eventually lets it go, but deep down she is really troubled. The following morning, Sarah is busy setting up an internet device on the ship's pole when Mary curiously asks Lindsay, who is busy texting a non-responsive Tommy, about a mark on her neck. Lindsay brushes off the question and starts texting Tommy. Strangely, she feels a touch on her neck again, thinking it's Mary, but when she looks up, there's no one around her. Mary just arrives to sit, and Mike is too far away. The young girl feels troubled. Sarah comes down to her room to tell David how she managed to get a 2-bar signal, but the man seems lost in thought. Worried, the woman comes over and David delivers the somber news to Sarah. He checked in on the mental institution and they informed him that Tommy had himself the previous night. This news terrifies the woman, who breaks down into tears, hugging David. Both of them are deeply saddened by this tragic event. Later, while they are all gathered together, Lindsay brings up Tommy. She asks her parents if he is doing okay since she is worried. Her father lies, saying that he wasn't able to make any contact with the institution due to signal issues. Sarah also chimes in to lessen her daughter's worry. She says that he must have reached Florida by now. All of a sudden, Mary mentions that they forgot dinner for the lady. This statement raises eyebrows, and Lindsay reveals that Mary has an imaginary friend with whom she converses throughout the night. The girl turns around to mock the little girl, saying that she should stop playing around. Mary's facial features change all of a sudden. Unexpectedly, she smashes a glass against Lindsay's face, shocking everyone. Panicked, Sarah quickly tends to Lindsay's wound while David scolds Mary, asking her to reflect on her actions. He stresses that she must apologize to her sister afterward. He comes out and shows Sarah a disturbing drawing of a he discovered in her room. As night falls, Sarah senses an ominous presence attempting to open their room's door, filling her with fear. She goes to the bathroom. As she is busy washing her face, the lights start flickering, hearing strange banging noise. She looks back and finds that someone is trying to force the bathroom door open. Upon exiting, she finds mysterious black footprints leading her to the ship's deck. There, a disembodied voice calls her name and launches an attack. Fortunately, Mike intervenes and comes to her rescue. This unsettling incident leaves Sarah deeply unnerved. When she comes back to her room, the anxious woman confides in David, suggesting that something is seriously amiss on the ship. She says that she feels strange things and perhaps they should consider turning back. However, David's response is anger-fueled, and he adamantly insists they're too far into their journey to turn back now. He tries his best to console the panic-stricken woman, but to no avail. Their argument soon escalates and David snaps at Sarah angrily. The woman, frustrated and convinced the ship is cursed, watches as David storms off. The next morning, we see Sarah entering the children's room to find Mary seated there quietly with her back to her. Just then, she hears a noise from behind and turns around but finds nothing. When Sarah moves back around, she finds that Mary has inexplicably vanished. All of a sudden, the woman is surrounded and assaulted by strange hands reaching out to her. She screams awake to find out that it was just a bloody, terrifying dream. David quickly gets up as well and rushes to embrace her, doing his best to console her. Then, all of a sudden, Mary arrives. Seeing her, Sarah calms down a little. Mary seems to have a little blood near her mouth. She shows off her broken tooth, horrifying her mother and explaining that the lady had assisted her in pulling it out. Moments later, we see Sarah putting Mary to bed. Lindsay crouches near the little girl and worriedly asks her mother what is going on. Sarah tries her best to remain strong and reassure her daughter. She comes out and tells a worried David that the bleeding finally stopped. Sarah inquires if David has been plagued by similar dreams, but he remains quiet, mentioning only that they'll reach Hamilton by the following morning. Meanwhile, Mike seems to be the latest victim of the strange spirit. On the other hand, independently, both Sarah and David dig into the boat's history, unearthing a disconcerting pattern. Its previous owners had all vanished on comparable journeys to the same destination. The implication is clear. The boat appears to be possessed by the vengeful spirit of a witch, intent on replacing her lost children after her tragic. With the ship now within Bermuda's vicinity, David quickly goes up and instructs Mike to alter their course. Although Mike agrees, David fails to notice the man's strange behavior. He then descends to join Sarah, who presents him with the gathered evidence of the 3 times that the ship went out into the open waters. It came back empty. All the crew members seem to have disappeared each time. Sarah admits that Jay was right. They shouldn't have ventured here, as the malevolent witch has a grim history of claiming lives and now threatens theirs. David defends his decision to acquire the ship, emphasizing his hopes for quality family time. Despite all the evidence and all the instances of hauntings, the man refuses to yield. Their argument reignites. Back to the present, we see Sarah telling Detective Clarkson how the spirit of the witch turned them against each other. Clarkson interjects, questioning why they didn't return or disembark from the ship if their predicament was so dire. Sarah explains that the witch seemed to exert control, preventing them from leaving the cursed vessel. There was nothing they could do because she was never going to let them go. Back to the past, David finally comes around and accepts the dreadful reality. He informs Sarah that their vessel is following the same ominous course as the previous owner's ship. It's then that Lindsay rushes over, her voice laced with concern, alerting them to something amiss with Mary. The couple rushes to their youngest side and they find Mary unnaturally cold. David urgently instructs Mike to send out a Mayday distress call. However, their attempts to reach help go unanswered. Growing increasingly desperate, David runs to the upper deck and makes a shocking discovery. All the ship's sails have been ruthlessly torn to shreds. Suddenly, Mike launches a surprise attack on David from behind, but Sarah intervenes just in time after hearing the commotion. As Sarah holds Mike, David manages to subdue him. Using a flashlight, the man hits him in the face, thus rendering him unconscious. Afterwards, the man locks him inside one of the cabins. Mike comes back to his senses to find himself tied and locked inside a room. The following day, they come to realize the extent of Mike's sabotage, or more precisely, the demon's sabotage who possessed him. He has destroyed the sails, drain the ship's fuel, and cast the satellite phone overboard. The family is left stranded in the open waters without any way to make contact with the people on land. A worried Sarah asks how they are going to reach Hamilton now that they do not have any radio or GPS. David curses at the ship and says that he is done with Hamilton. With his family's life at stake, he decides to dock on any nearest land he can find and abandon this curse of a ship. David then decides to confront Mike, seeking answers about the satellite phone. He replies, saying that he threw it away since David won't be needing it anymore. Mike cryptically informs him that he and everything he loves now belong to the witch. David implores him to regain control, but Mike asserts that he must obey the malevolent presence. He pleads with David to open the cabin door and obey the witch's order so she may spare them. With a heavy heart, David realizes that it is too late for his dear friend Mike. David goes back and prepares his flare gun. All of a sudden, he hears a disturbance and investigates. To his astonishment, he spots a shadow lurking in the water below. Unbeknownst to him, someone opens the door to Mike's cabin, telling him that they have work to do. Meanwhile, back in the room, a sleeping Lindsay is woken up from her slumber by Tommy, who miraculously reappears on the ship. She follows him to the top deck, where Tommy encourages her to take her. Just as she's about to succumb to his persuasion, David arrives in the nick of time, preventing her daughter from falling to her demise. Sarah also rushes out after hearing the noise. As the couple strive to rescue Lindsay from the witch's sinister influence, Mike reappears and launches a brutal attack on David, then turns his attention to Sarah. Back to the present, we see Detective Clarkson's disbelieving eyes and Sarah's pitiful and tortured face. She knows that the detective is far from believing her words, yet she still narrates the story word for word. Back to the past, Sarah regains consciousness to find herself tied up, helplessly witnessing Mike toss David overboard. She too is pushed over the side of the boat by Mike, but manages to free herself and scramble back on board. A fierce struggle ensues between Sarah and Mike, with Mike gaining the upper hand. Just as Mike is about to take out Sarah using a menacing knife, David, still alive, miraculously reappears. He takes aim with a harpoon gun and shoots Mike, saving his wife. A possessed man soon falls to his demise into the threatening waters down below. David focuses on turning the boat around while Sarah, gasping for breath, rushes downstairs in search of her daughters. She sees David's flare gun and grabs it. After searching for a while, she finally hears her daughters' voices in a cabin and frees them. Once out on the deck, she secures them in life jackets and ushers them into the water while David valiantly steers the boat. After taking care of her children, Sarah comes back towards David, only to find him unconscious. She cries her heart out while hugging her husband. All of a sudden, the malevolent witch emerges from behind David, attacking Sarah. In a desperate act, Sarah fires the flare gun at the witch, triggering a massive explosion that engulfs the boat. In the ensuing chaos, David succumbs to the witch's deadly assault. The screen cuts to the present day and we see Sarah, the sole survivor, recounting the harrowing events to Detective Clarkson. She explains that she was thrown from the boat and attempted to locate her daughters, but she was ultimately overpowered by the currents, thus could not locate them. But now that she has rescued them from the witch's clutches and they are safe, it is all that matters. She expresses her yearning to see her daughters again. The detective looks at Sarah as if she is mentally unstable and leaves the room. Outside, she tells the officer to let the woman meet her daughters for a few minutes. Clarkson reaches a chilling conclusion. She believes that Sarah is a delusional convict and dismisses her story as madness. Later, while Sarah is escorted away to meet her children, Clarkson reviews the interrogation footage and stumbles upon a bizarre video distortion. She finds the apparition of the witch in Sarah's stead. Horrified, she uncovers the truth. Sarah is possessed by the very witch she had battled. A noise from the room where Sarah had been detained alarms Clarkson, and she discovers the lifeless body of the officer who had escorted Sarah, with Sarah nowhere to be found. It becomes chillingly evident that the witch has escaped. The movie ends with a final scene that reveals the police station in the midst of a torrential storm, reminiscent of the weather that had surrounded the ill-fated boat and the ill-fated witch.